If you aren't a movie and movie-related discussions, you've come to the right place. Who am I, you ask? I am the Wiz, and I am here today with...
Zero.
How was your 2 weeks, my friend?
It was just back-to-back deadlines, and I am so burned.
Oh, man. You told me a little bit about it throughout the few weeks, but even then, like, it was like, oh, I'm so tired, and, oh, fuck this. It's like, I'm gonna go to bed. I'm like, oh, wow. That's something else. Well,
yeah, that was pretty much all of last week. It was just kind of like, oh, God, this day burned me. So many things to take care of. I'm going to bed. I know it's 8 o'clock, but I don't give a shit.
Yeah, I remember how that is. Are you past that, or are you still at that point?
Some folks in my industry have basically said, oh, you thought that was crazy. It's only getting started. And I'm like, oh, God.
Oh, lovely. That's terrible. All right. About last week, I just want to give a heads up. I did intend to do reviews last week. Unfortunately, I got sick. And I had a sore throat, cold. And I was miserable, too. Like, I would be terrible to deal with. And I sounded like crap, too. So I just canceled everything for the week. And we're going to do all the reviews that I had last week for this week. And we'll go moving forward from there. So, again, sorry about that. And sorry I didn't post anything on socials. I really was just miserable throughout the entire week. So we are here to review the 1985 Japanese comedy Tampopo, starring Ken Watanabe, directed by Juzo Itami. I gotta be honest, Zero, these are one of the films that I decided to watch because I've heard so many people glow about this movie. I frequent a lot of forums, a lot of pages on Facebook, Twitter, when it comes to film discussions, especially with the Criterion Collection, and a lot of people raved about this movie. So that is really the reason why I chose this movie. Are there any kind of movies that you have that you just keep hearing people like glow about, and you're like, well, fuck, I gotta see this movie even though I'm not really that interested?
There are a few. I just cannot think of them to mind, but I think that's mostly because my mind is still reeling from my workday stuff. But yeah. There are a couple in my mind that if I can remember them, I'll probably mention them or something. But yeah, there's always the few movies that people are just like, oh my God, you gotta drop everything and go see this. And I'm just like, okay, that's neat. I'm not much of a movie person, but you know, if I get a chance, I'll take a watch. And I always get worried when people make like almost hyperbolic claims like that, because it sets a very high expectation. Not something that I consciously think about, but subconsciously my mind's just like, well, if they're raving about this movie, it must be good, right? And then, you know, as a tale as old as time, sometimes someone will hype up something so much that when you go and do whatever thing that was and it ends up not meeting your expectations, you end up kind of underwhelmed. You're just like, wow, people got excited for this? For fucking this? Ugh, what a waste of my time.
Yeah, and we felt that way with Everything Everywhere All at Once this past year. That got praised to high moon, and then when we finally saw it, we're like, that was it? Really? We've had plenty, and I agree with you, too, that not only with movies, but with games, where you keep hearing people going, oh my God, it's so amazing, it's this and that, and you're like, is it really? So you just feel compelled to watch it, and then, I don't know if it's the hype, or it's just how much praise is heaped upon it that finally brings somebody to experience it, to then say, it's not all it's cracked up to be to me. I don't know what that is. That could be a me issue, true, but I think that's just a basic human nature thing, where the more you hear how good it is, the more you're like, oh, then it must be amazing. It must be the best thing. And then when it's not, it's like, yeah, that's kind of disappointing. All right, so why don't we get into the review of Tampopo, directed by Juzo Itami. We're going to do light spoilers in this one, since it is a comedy. Me and Zero kind of have a rule. When it's a comedy, we don't really do spoilers, because that'd be basically spoiling the jokes. So we're going to do light spoilers from here on out with this. Yeah, speaking of being overhyped, I don't get why people love this movie so much. I get it's a silly comedy, and there are parts of it that are kind of funny, in like a corny kind of way, but they're kind of funny. I'm gonna be a little self-deprecating here and say that there are things in this film that kind of made me a little sick when watching it, to be completely honest. So if these things don't bother you, then I think you'll get more enjoyment out of it than this. So I'm just going to bear this in mind. But even taking that stuff out, which are really just 2 or 3 scenes, I came off of this kind of bored at the end and being like, this is not all it's cracked up to be. I would say it's decent in parts, but overall, not a movie that's for me.
The main plot I thought was okay. It wasn't anything super special or anything to write home about. The main plot was okay. Some of the interluded vignettes I thought were kind of fun. The one that starts off the movie was kind of fourth wall breaking because it just kind of comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But then there's one that gets into cringe territory really early on. You're just like, ugh. With that particular vignette, with these two particular characters, it gets a little bit gross, and you're just like, oh, God. This is a little bit hard to watch because it's kind of gross.
Yeah. Like, what we're talking about here is this couple who regularly have sex or sexual intercourse or some kind of sexual, I guess, behavior, but they implement food at every time that they have these things. So in one example, they make out with an uncooked egg, essentially. And
the yolk in particular.
Yeah. And at that point, I watched it, and within like a few seconds I gagged because like, oh God, and I had to look away. But if you can handle that stuff, then okay, that's fine. But I just sat there going, ew, what the hell is this? But again, that's like, I guess, 3 scenes in this movie. This the man in the white suit and his lover, essentially.
Yeah.
But
and then there was one vignette that was kind of funny to me, mostly because it involves like manners and food, because like in Japanese culture, manners and food are very important, because it kind of shows like somebody who has been taught their manners versus somebody who hasn't. That particular vignette I thought was fucking hilarious.
I thought that was a cute vignette. I thought that was pretty funny. I guess my issue with this movie is that the vignettes seem to be where I think a lot of people seem to say why Tampopo is actually a really good movie. And it's those vignettes where I kind of sat there being like, okay, whatever. They're fine, I guess. Or in some instances, I really question as to why they were there in the first place. I don't know if it's just me as I get older now, but I'm starting to get to a point where I guess sex, to a certain extent, just to have it in there seems to be like a non-starter for me. It's like, is that really necessary? I don't mind movies where it is necessary, where it's vital to the plot, or something along those lines, or they do something with it that is interesting. But for most part, with most movies that I have seen, I would say maybe not recently, but more movies I've seen recently that we've watched here, is where sex scenes seem to come off as, well, here's some nudity. Why? Like, why is that necessary? But I'm gonna guess too, there's gonna be people who are seeing those scenes go, those are the best scenes of the movie. And yeah, that's your opinion, and I respect that. But I got to a point where I'm like, are these scenes necessary? Really? What about you? What are your thoughts on sex scenes in films?
I think in this one in particular, it's kind of a play off of the old-timey westerns in a sense, because when I was doing some supplemental research for the movie review, apparently the publicity for Tampopo was being marketed as a ramen western, kind of like how you had the spaghetti westerns back in the day, of an Italian filmmaker making a western-style film. But in the sense of this movie being called a ramen western, it's western movie-style tropes, but in a Japanese setting, and it's not really limited by time period or anything. So I think the sex scenes, while just awkward and almost kind of cringe and shoehorned in, I think it was sort of Itami-san's way of kind of playing off of the salacious romantic scenes in westerns. That's really my only guess. If that's true or not, I've got no idea.
You know, my experience with westerns is pretty limited. I've seen probably some of the big ones by John Ford and Sergio Leone, but I haven't seen a lot of the spaghetti westerns. I haven't seen a lot of the other westerns. So again, I'm limited when it comes to my knowledge of this. When I chose the movies for this past week, I deliberately did westerns because I read on Google this was a comedy western. I'm like, I didn't know this was a western. Okay, awesome. I want to watch more westerns now. At the end of this movie, I was like, except for like some tangible aspects, I do not see how this is a western, like at all. I mean, maybe with like the scenes of Goro fighting multiple people in certain aspects, or the fight scenes in that, maybe that's Western-esque. I think that's a real stretch to call this a Western. But again, maybe someone can point out, well, actually, since you're not really that well versed in Westerns, here is why. Then I will gladly hear it. From the limited experience I've had with them, I just could not see how this could be considered a Western. Comedy, yes. I definitely see how this is a comedy, but not a Western, really. Performances are okay.
Yeah, overall the cast was okay. I mean, no one really stood out in my opinion, but I mean, maybe that's just me.
Habuko Miyamoto is not bad as Tampopo. I mean, she's likable, cute, you know, like that I didn't mind her so much. I actually did not like Ken Watanabe as much as I would have thought. And he plays Gun, not Goro. Sorry. Nothing really elicited that much of a reaction to me. And not even just like, oh, this is so unfunny. Or I didn't even get one of those either. I got kind of like, oh, okay, I see how that could be funny. Like, that's as much as I got out of this movie. I guess we should get into the plot, really. Gun, who's played by Ken Watanabe, is a milk truck driver who stops by at a ramen shop that is run by Tampopo and basically helps her try to improve the shop to get more business. I think that plot is fine. Is okay as it is, it's not engaging enough for me to actually want to really experience more of the film. And I guess that is why they had the vignettes there, to do these awkward, like, funny comedic things. And there's only, like, maybe 2 that I can think of that I actually reacted positively to. And one where I'm like, what was the point of this? And, like, the vignettes, to a certain extent, was like, it just seemed like filler to me.
Some of the vignettes were kind of funny. Some of them were kind of on the morose side. And they're kind of all over the place. I didn't really care much for the sexual exploration one. That got a little cringe at some points.
Oh, man. I will say this. If you are not bothered by that stuff, and I know a good amount of people are not, and they'll think of us as prudish or whatever, whatever, I don't care. If you're not bothered by that, I can see why some people might find this funny. And I think that's where I have a hard time calling this a bad movie, because I don't find it funny. But I can definitely see where some people would actually find enjoyment in this movie. Like, I'm not surprised people love this movie. It just is not for me with what it's doing.
I think it's an alright movie, but some of the vignettes kind of hit the mark, and then some of them get into cringe territory, and then some of them are a little bit on the morose side, and it just kind of gives a vibe that this movie's sort of all over the place.
But I think that was kind of the point, though.
Yeah, and I mean, and I get that. I mean, that that is kind of, that seems to be sort of in line with some of the themes of Western movies, where they're just kind of vignettes peppered all over the main plot and everything. So I guess to me, I didn't really jive with it too much, because it was just like, wow, this is so jumpy. You're going from like main plot, oh, hey, by the way, here's a vignette that takes place in possibly another part of town or something, and then it transitions back to the main plot, and then you've got maybe another vignette that's maybe adjacent to where the main plot's taking place. It's just so jumpy with it. So, but maybe that's a me thing, that I would have liked a little bit more smoother transitions, but maybe that was kind of the style that they were going for.
Or like a connection. Like, I think if there were connections between all these characters, I think I would have gotten more into those vignettes, but since they all seem kind of like separated out from each other, is where I was kind of like, I don't really understand why they're doing all this. I would have liked more of a connection, but there are just some that I think would have benefited for having a connection to the main plot. I think that might have helped with me at least a little bit on this. I read somewhere that people seem to think that this got inspiration from comic books and stuff like that. I don't know if it's too early for this to be inspired by anime, or if anime was inspired by this, but I definitely got some goofy-ass anime vibes from this movie.
I think that may be kind of a stretch, in my opinion.
Okay,
especially with the fact that it seems very much spaghetti western inspired to a sense. So, in my opinion, I think that might be sort of reaching, but that's purely my opinion on the matter.
Could it be the setting that caused that with me? I'm not entirely sure. Like,
that could definitely be it, especially since it's a more contemporary setting versus an actual Western setting.
Yeah, you know, I'm actually thinking about that now, and I think anime, you're probably right. It's probably the wrong thing to really come across. It had this really weird vibe to it that, again, if it clicks with you, it clicks, but it just didn't. I just can't really grasp as to what it is that did not grab me when I was watching this movie, other than I just didn't think a lot of it was that funny, to be absolutely honest. I guess really the question I would have is, what are people seeing in this? This is one of these movies where I really want to talk to somebody and have an in-depth conversation as to what exactly did they see in this that makes them react so strongly to it. Like, this is a definite conversation movie where I would really have to sit down with somebody and go, why did you like this? Please help me understand. It's not like I can't grasp why somebody would. It's just that I definitely see something's there, but I'm not getting it.
This one, I could see why some people like it, but even still, it's a little bit with difficulty for me to kind of agree and say, okay, yeah, I can totally see why you like it, but maybe this is one of the few films that I'm probably not in the target audience.
Well, that could very well be, but there are film forums and there are pages that praise this movie, and I mean praise this movie. There are some posts that call this the best in the Criterion Collection, and that's where I was like, whoa, hold up. Are you serious? Like, and that's where I was like, okay, then I gotta see this, because I'm a big Criterion Collection fan and I like to collect their stuff. So when I heard this is one of the best, I'm like, I gotta see it. I guess I really need to dive into a conversation with some of these people and really have them explain why. And not in like a, explain yourself, more like, I just want to understand, because there's something I'm missing here, and I really want to grasp as to what it is. I guess that's really my thing here, is that if I don't really grasp what the movie is trying to do, it's kind of hard for me to recommend it, and I'm kind of at that point.
I thought with the main plot being alright, and the vignettes just being all over the place, either some being alright, morose, cringe, actually kind of funny, it's just hard for me to feel comfortable to recommend this to everyone. I would say that there might be a very limited span of people I could recommend this to, but yeah, just it's not something that I could just go, oh yeah, just everyone's got to go make time and watch this.
Yeah, I kind of have to agree with you there. Like, it's not a movie where I would actually sit there with somebody and go, don't bother, just don't bother. It would be something like, this is a bad example, it would be kind of like Gendelman, if you are a big movie buff. Gendelman, whether you love it or hate it, I think is something that if you are really into movies, you have to see. I don't know if I would go that far with Tampopo, but if you are into weird movies and you haven't seen it, I think I would say to a person like that, you should see it. But if you aren't into like weird, off-kilter, kind of gross kind of comedy, that's where I'm like, no, don't. But I think in that end, I would say, if you are into like weird, different, strange movies, I would definitely give it a shot. I don't know if they would love it or hate it, but I would think they would get a little out of it and go, huh, okay, that's interesting. Like something along those lines.
This one, unfortunately, I'm probably going to have to give it somewhere to the tune of like a 40%, because it's like I've reiterated in the main review, just the main focal plot of the movie is fine. It's nothing groundbreaking. With the fact that it's styled kind of as a ramen western with sort of the tropes that you would see in kind of a spaghetti western and everything, I get where the movie's trying to pay homage to its inspirations, but at the same time, I think it almost kind of does a disservice to the movie with just how disjointed some of the other vignettes are. And I would have liked to have had some sort of tying relationship to the vignettes and everything. Like, you know, hey, this character actually knows this character, this is how we're transitioning over to this particular vignette or something. But instead, just, I think, with all the vignettes sort of peppered around, I think it almost kind of makes the film feel disjointed as a result. But again, that might be just a spaghetti western sort of trope. So maybe I'm just not getting it because I'm not really the biggest person into westerns or spaghetti westerns at all. Some of the vignettes that I thought were kind of funny and interesting, I think those were the ones that kind of kept me a little bit more engaged, but This is definitely not a movie that I could easily recommend to everyone. This might be something for someone I could recommend who does enjoy Western tropes or spaghetti Western tropes, but especially with kind of the cringe sexual exploration vignettes, that would make it even further harder for me to recommend because, just you say, oh yeah, well, how do you feel about, sex on the silver screen? And if the person gets kind of prudish and grossed out, you're just like, oh, never mind. So yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm gonna probably be on this movie. It's ultimately fine, but it's just definitely not for me.
I think we're gonna agree on a lot of this. I'm giving it 2 out of 5. I agree with you for the most part through everything. I just don't think a lot of it lands, and it's kind of hard to recommend this to a lot of different people. I think the ones that really like strange, weird film are going to be the ones that I think will really gravitate towards this, or don't mind some of the things that are in this movie, such as like the sex with food stuff, which I'm like, okay, cool. But it's hard for me to say this is a bad movie. It just really isn't for me. I just don't think I clicked with this very well, and this is just one of those movies I feel that you're going to have to click with in order to really get into it. And if you don't, it's just not going to be a good time for you. I'm not going to call it terrible. I think the main plot is okay, but the comedy vignettes in Tampopo just didn't do much for me at all. 2 stars out of 5 for me, 40% for Zero. This is one of the harder things to review because I can't objectively say this movie's terrible. I really can't, because I know deep down that I'm just not clicking with it. On the other hand, like, I can't also say to people, if you like movies, you should try it. Like, no. You have to be comfortable with certain things in a movie in order to do that. 2 stars for me, 40% for Zero on